welcome to this video. My name is Jonathan Curtis, and today I'm going to be discussing one of my pieces entitled Jhana. This was a piece written in conjunction with an Arts Council project I've been finishing over the past 18 months or so, and is part of a collection of compositions from a publication entitled Snare Drum Compositions Volume 2, which is a direct follow-on from a book I released a few years ago. Jhana is one of 5 pieces in this collection, written primarily for snare drum, but with a 3-part unpitched percussive accompaniment. These nominally include a bass drum, a taiko or conga drum, and tuned wood blocks at the top, so a low, a mid, and a high-pitched accompaniment. The subtitle of this composition collection is Meditations, and this provided a kind of thematic aesthetic for the pieces, as well as some compositional elements that I tried to include as well. I wanted to evoke certain feelings, certain sensations, or certain themes. So all of the pieces in this collection are themed towards this idea of meditation. So Jhana, the piece I'm discussing here today, the idea of jhana is a very, very old one. It comes from ancient India and has been around for a few thousand years. There are ideas of jhana in Buddhism, in Hinduism, and in various other ancient Indian religions as well. Essentially, jhana is a meditative practice, and it describes a sort of mental state in which we are, A, very calm and relaxed, but B, perhaps more importantly, very open to insight through this kind of channeling of concentration. So Jhana describes a sense of concentration. It's a bit tricky to translate, and there are debates as to the actual meaning of jhana. It has been translated as meditation itself, the act of concentration, and various parts in between. But essentially, jhana is a state of meditation that many meditators try to achieve or attain as they practice their meditation. And though it may be initially unclear what this has to do with drumming, these ideas are, as I say, themes that I tried to evoke through both the listening to and performing of these pieces. So as with many of the things I write, these pieces are quite complex, they're quite difficult. It requires a certain sense of concentration to perform them. So when I performed these, I tried to invoke in myself this sense of concentration, and perhaps through the use of rhythmic device, tone and sound, evoke a sense of concentration and an almost trance-like state in any audience listening to this as well. So as a piece, Jhana is written in the time signature of 1416. Like many of the pieces I write, I use time signatures in a very functional way. So I use these time signatures to try to convey as much relevant information as I can. Now, that may not be immediately obvious with a time signature like 1416 until we consider what this is actually telling us. 1416 is essentially the time signature of 2/4, 2 primary beats to the bar, but rather than containing 4 16th notes each, it contains 7. So the basic meter on which jhana is written is 2 groups of 7 16th notes per beat. Very simply, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got these 2 very clear 7-note groupings across 2 principal beats in the bar. This is used to inform a lot of the phrasing and also allows for the phrasing to subvert this as well, as we shall see. So there is a lot of syncopation in there where the accents take the emphasis points away from the main beat. Jhana is written across 5 sections, and it follows quite an interesting pattern of common time, half time, common time, half time, common time. So across the 5 sections, 3 of them are in common time, and 2 of them are in half time, which effectively halves the tempo. This gave rise to some interesting rhythmic ideas, some interesting phrasing, and also allows for a contrast between the faster sections in the common time sections, which are quite intense, quite driving, and the slower yet more complex or dense sections in the half time. Because of the effective halving of the tempo, the common time sections allow for more adventurous, dense, complex rhythmic phrases that would simply be too fast or unfeasible in the common time sections. So throughout the course of the piece, which is actually quite short, it's only 2 minutes or so to perform, 2 pages, 50 odd bars, something like that, you get a great sense of contrast between, as I say, these faster, more intense common time sections and the slower but more dense complex halftime sections. And again, this is written in conjunction with the themes I spoke about, where the act of meditation can be very turbulent, especially when you're new to it and you're practicing. You can have periods of what feel like very intense states of mind or experiences, and you can have periods of very calm, very relaxed, passive states of mind. But all the while, there's this sense of searching. You're trying to, as I say, evoke this sense of calm, insight, and concentration. So the differences between the common time and the half-time sections and the use of phrasing and the use of intensity and syncopation are all trying to evoke that a little bit. Now, the material I'm talking about today is accompanied by a written essay which occurs in the actual publication of these scores. And in that essay, I do say that it is possible to overdo a metaphor. We can labour the point on these metaphors about concentration and meditation. I do want to be clear that while I did use these themes of meditation as a basis for thematic ideas and aesthetics and ambience and things like that, they are essentially pieces of music. They are not modern art that's trying to really tie in these metaphors too closely. So anytime I'm speaking about these metaphors, I am using them generally quite loosely. This idea of meditation just provided a nice background on which I could start building these pieces. So, with that said, we can start to explore this actual piece in detail. And I'm going to do this by addressing the vocabulary in the common time first, and then contrasting that with the vocabulary in the half-time sections, and we can see how these come together to produce the piece. So, as I've said, the main meter, the main time signature is 14/16, which is 2 7-note groupings per beat. And I used an approach of measured rolls in the common time sections to produce these noted groupings. So, what do I mean by this? Well, a measured roll, in the sense that I am using it, refers to a set number of notes that begin with an accent. That accent is played as a single stroke, and all the subsequent notes that lead up to the next accent are played by double strokes. In rudimental drumming, we would call these 3, 5, 7, and 9-stroke rolls. So a 5-stroke roll would have an accent followed by 2 sets of doubles. Likewise, a 7-stroke roll would expand this to 7 strokes simply by adding a 3rd set of doubles. So we have our 5 and our 7 strokes, and so on. Now, I deviated from the typical usage of this slightly by changing the 2 and the 3-stroke groupings. For the 2, I used flam taps. A flam tap is essentially a double-stroke roll, but with a flam on the first stroke. So this gives us a 2-note grouping on the same hand, the first of which is a flammed accent, and the second of which is a tap. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Likewise, for the 3, rather than using what we might call a 3-stroke roll, which would be an accent followed by a double, I used Swiss Army triplets instead, which is essentially a flam tap with an extra single on the end. So putting these all together, we had 2-note groupings, 3-note groupings, 5-note groupings, and 7-note groupings. Notice these are all odd numbers, 3, 5, 7, and 9, excepting the 2, of course. Now, for the even numbers, I used paradiddle stickings. This is very similar to the measured rolls, but uses 2 singles at the beginning instead. So to produce our 4-note grouping, we have accent, tap, double. To produce a 6-note grouping, accent, tap, double, double. So 4s just become simple paradiddles. And we might consider our 6s as simple paradiddle diddles. Now, this is a really useful concept because it means we have a ready-made sticking, a predefined sticking pattern for any noted grouping all the way up to 8s or 9s. We use measured rolls for the odd numbers, 3, 5, 7, and 9 itself, and we use paradiddle variations for the even numbers, 4, 6, and 8. And this means when we produce our figures with different noted groupings, which is the approach I took in this first common time section, I don't need to worry about the sticking because it's already defined for me. So when we listen to the opening bars of this section, If I play the first 3 bars here, we will hear that the phrasing itself comes from combinations of these noted groupings. You can hear the entire phrase there comes from the accents which are generated by the placement of these odd measured rolls. I think they're all odd. No, there are some 2s and 4s in there as well. So the conjunction of these odd and even measured rolls is what actually produces that sticking pattern. Let's have another listen. Remember, this is 2 groups of 7 per bar. So those opening 7-stroke rolls, they are on the beat. That sets out the meter, and then we quickly move away from that with the syncopation, which is produced by the different numbered groupings that follow. And then we finish at the end of that 3rd bar, and we've got this phrase starting to take shape. Now, as we progress through this first section, we start to encounter a little bit more use of vocabulary. The first thing is I started to change the accents into 8th notes. So far we've been dealing with straight 16th notes. Everything is evenly spaced. But as we progress through, I start to add a bit of pause into these pieces by changing the accents to 8th notes. This means that our 2-stroke flam tap, which did previously comprise 2 16th notes, now just comprises a single 8th note accent. And we have that pause after it. Likewise, a 3-stroke Swiss triplet, which did previously comprise 3 16th notes, now just comprises the accent, followed by a rest, followed by a tap. Now, this has the effect of inserting pauses into the groupings without losing the momentum, the forward momentum that these sticking patterns create. So if I carry on into the next few bars, we will start to hear how these pauses change the sensation that these rhythms create, but as I say, maintains the sense of forward momentum. Starting at the beginning again, so you can hear the switch. So on. You can start to hear there, by having the pauses, the 8th notes for the accents, we get this very definitive emphasized accent pattern, which, as we hear in the full performance, is further emphasized by the accompanying parts playing in sync with those. So I was able to use the accompanying parts to further accentuate the parts in the phrase that I really wanted, which we'll hear a bit later on. Now, you can hear there a lot of accents and a lot of notes going on there, but essentially, considering the 2 vocabulary elements that I just discussed, the use of measured rolls as straight 16th notes and then the use of measured rolls with 8th notes as the accents, essentially this entire section is built from numbered groupings. And this is what gives us the accent placement. So as you heard there are a lot of accents, many of them syncopated against the underlying meter, but those accent positions are determined by the numbered groupings that I used. To show you what I mean there, we can consider the opening 2 bars. They follow the numbered grouping 7, 7, 2, 2, 4, 3, 3. And that adds up to the total number of 16th notes across 2 bars of 14/16. So that comprises 28 16th notes. So the position of the accents and the sticking are defined for us by the use of this 7, 7, 2, 2, 4, 3, 3 grouping. So we can actually play through the opening 2 bars of this piece, counting that grouping, and we will hear how it defines those accent positions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. As I said, the sticking is already defined for me because of this measured roll sticking concept that I'm using. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And this is a device that I used throughout all of the common time sections in this piece. Now, from bar 18, we enter the second section of this piece and we encounter the first of our two halftime sections in this piece. Halftime is quite a difficult modulation to actually describe from theoretical terms, but essentially, the easiest way to think of it is an effective halving of the tempo. This means that every note value effectively doubles. So the 16th notes start behaving now as if they were 8th notes. This means we progress from counting it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It would become like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This, as I say, essentially constitutes an effective halving of the tempo. Now, this has a couple of upshots. It means that the pace effectively halves, so we get this dramatic, significant slowing of the tempo, but it also gives us a lot more space, which we can fill with more exploratory vocabulary, which is the approach I take here. So looking at some of the sections in front of me here, which I will put up on the screen, we have these 64th notes. We have 64th note freezo, we have 64th note paradiddles, we have 32nd note sextuplets, some of which are diddled into 64th notes. We have these syncopated 32nd notes, all of these phrases which just simply wouldn't be possible at our normal common time tempo. So by changing our overall meter to this halftime feel gives us all of this space to explore this more dense vocabulary. Now, as I say, the difficulty here is no longer the technical approach. I'll come to the technical considerations in a moment, but the main difficulty here is simply in recognizing the rhythms. As you can see from some of the images on screen, these rhythms are very unfamiliar, they're not easily recognizable, they're not typical. They do make sense, but once you've familiarized yourself with them. Let's take a look at one of these figures in detail now. I'll use this one that's on screen. And you can see that at a glance, it's not very typical. It's not an easy rhythm to read. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we are clear with where the divisions of the beat occur. And this is the simplest step. This is to simply look where the first beam grouping ends and the second beam grouping begins. So we can see all of those notes in the first beam grouping. They belong to the first beat of the bar. And as we know from the 14/16 time signature, they comprise 7/16 notes. The second set of beam groupings, the second notes in that second beam group, they comprise the second beat of the bar, again corresponding to 7/16 notes. Now, because we've had a half-time modulation occur, we can initially plot it like this with those 7/16 notes underneath. So we can plot that rhythm against 7/16 notes. However, as you can see, that is not particularly helpful. So instead, we can take into account the nature of the halftime modulation and we can plot them like this instead, imagining we are still dealing with two groups of 7/16 notes per beat. This gives us a way to plot the individual notes of the rhythm against the underlying meter. So now it simply becomes a counting game. Everything is either double or halved against the underlying 16th note beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's our first beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got some 64th notes in there, two of which comprise a single 32nd note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. As we progress into the second beat, we've got that long 8th note, which takes up two of the 16th notes. It's a slightly less intense rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So when we put these two beats together, we get the figure in this bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The main challenge is in familiarizing yourself with the rhythms. And this means actually being able to internalize them such that you are not reading the individual notes, but you are using them in the same way you would recognize a word and hearing instantly how that word would sound. Let's stick with this metaphor of reading for a moment. When you learn to read, and I'm going through this at the moment because my 4-year-old daughter is learning to read, you start by sounding out every letter. So if you take a word like cat, you see the k, you see the a, and you see the t, and you build the word kat as you recognize the individual phonetic syllables involved. But as you become more adept at this, you stop seeing the three letters of the word and you just see the word as a whole. And this sparks a reflex in you. This idea of reflex is something I will talk about a little more in more detail. It sparks the reflex of the sound cat. We don't read the individual letters, you just see the word and it conjures to mind instantly the reflex of the sound it creates. So I don't see cat, I just see cat as a whole. And this is something that happens in written music as well. We can start by seeing the right, the left, the right, right, but then eventually you just see the paradiddle as a block of 4 notes. And when dealing with materials such as that found in the halftime sections of Jhana here, we need to practice in such a way that cultivates the same effect. So when we're looking at a difficult rhythm like this, obviously, as a child does, we have to begin by going through it letter by letter, note by note, making sure we are producing the correct sound in the correct way. So this essentially comprises what I was just demonstrating. Following the sticking, following the accents, and following the rhythm against the underlying subdivision so that we are simply sounding out the word for the first time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At that early stage, it's going to feel very clumsy, it's going to feel very unfamiliar, and it's not going to sound like much. But with repetition, with persistence and with counting, you start to develop the sense, as when reading, of how that phrase sounds as a whole. So let's look at the first beat here, especially the first 5/16 notes. Okay, there's a rhythm starting to form there. What about the final 2/16 notes, which have got these awkward 64th note freezate in them? Oh, okay, that's not actually so bad. So when we put these two elements together, we get the first word. Now, if we were to start to repeat that, you can hear there's definitely a figure there. And I've actually just given the game away. When you can get to the point where you can sing it to yourself, you are going to get to the point where you can perform it quite comfortably. Because look at the notes, okay? That's not the sort of thing you can sight read at fast tempo unless you're very, very familiar with this sort of specialist vocabulary. So instead, you're trying to train yourself to the point where you know what the phrases sound like already, and you are using the notes on the page as just a visual cue to remind yourself of which word you are supposed to be playing. So it is like somebody giving a speech. If they have practiced the speech enough, they're not following a script, but they may have some cues and notes just to keep them on track to help them remember the points they're making. Now, when I recorded this, I was reading the score, but it would not be fair to say I was sight reading it. Certainly not. You can't, or certainly I can't, sight read this sort of material at the sort of tempo at which I was trying to perform it. So instead, your eyes are scanning from word to word. And because of the way I'd practiced, which is what I just described, as I see each rhythmic grouping, it conjures in me the reflex, which just kind of happens automatically at the point of performance, of the sticking required and, crucially, the sound that that phrase produces. So as I got to this bar, I wasn't trying to work out the syncopation of those 30-second notes on the second beat. It was more just, oh yeah, this one. That's essentially the sense that it creates. And that's the phrase. So if you work your way through step by step, you build up your familiarity with each of these phrases in a way that lets you hear them as you play them. Now, when following this process and working through a piece like this with rhythms like this, we might come across a pattern that is particularly dense, particularly unusual, and considering the meter, we might just look at it and throw our hands up in despair and say, no idea. So let's have a look at this example on screen now, which does come from the piece Jhana. We look at that bracketed second beat of the bar and we might look at that and go, how am I supposed to play that? Especially knowing the time signature we're in, dealing with 7 notes in the bar. So one of the ways we can start to tackle this, even if we sort of write out the 16th notes underneath it and try and count it like we did in the previous example, we might just have too much trouble recognizing the use of those syncopated offset 30-second notes, and certainly those intimidating looking 64th notes at the beginning of the pattern. So what we can actually do is modulate this entire phrase into much bigger note groupings. So I'm going to take those 64th notes and I'm going to convert them into 16th notes. And then every note that comes after that is going to become a correspondingly bigger note value. Having a look at the bar that's on screen now, this is, believe it or not, the exact same rhythm, except using just much bigger note values. I've modulated the time signature to be 7/4 to allow for these bigger note groupings, and you can now see that entire rhythm, which was very dense with 64th notes and syncopated 30-second notes, is now much more accessible across 7 quarter notes of the bar using nothing smaller than a 16th note. So if we work our way through this bar as we would any rhythm like this, 1 E and, 2 E and, 3 E and, 4 E and, 5 E and, 6 E and, 7 E and, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, I'm starting to hear it now. As long as when I'm practicing that, I keep counting the 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So when we go back and look at the pattern as it originally appears in the notation, we can actually see, okay, we're using these unfamiliar tiny little note values, but it still has the same relationship as these much bigger note values. And the rhythm as it appears in that 7/4 bar is much more manageable, much more palatable. So this is one approach that we can use to tackle these really unfamiliar rhythms, which are actually mainly challenging because of the note values they use and not necessarily because of the rhythms they produce. So if we return to the first section now, we've looked at how this phrasing came about, the use of the measured rolls and various numbered combinations to place the accents. The technical challenge comes in performing the dynamic contrast between the accents and the taps. If we play this all too loudly, okay, it doesn't sound bad. We've got some flams in there, but we're essentially just playing loud 16th notes. We've essentially got 16th note accents followed by one instance of a 30-second note 5-stroke roll. And what we're really trying to do here is perform the dynamic contrast, very loud or as loud as we can accents followed by taps that are much quieter. So we need to be able to hear those accents standing out within the din, so to speak. That's where the main musical element is coming from. Now, as I was practicing this and trying to take this as fast as I physically could, essentially, the main element, the main challenge that I kept encountering was tension across the top of my hand, which seems an awfully specific thing to say because we always talk about trying to avoid tension. But it's understanding and recognizing where that tension is and then being able to try to get rid of it as best we can. I found, at least for me, and I suspect this is the same for many people that try this, the frequent flams, like in the second bar where we've got these flam taps, paradiddles, and Swiss triplets. That's our 2-2-4-3-3 pattern. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 3-4, 1-2, 3, 1-2, 3. Because of the condensed nature of those flams being back to back, especially the flam taps and the Swiss triplets with those 2 consecutive strokes on the same hand, I found a lot of tension creeping in across the very top of my hand, just behind my knuckles. And I think this has to do with squeezing the thumb slightly and these fingers at the back of the hand, pulling the stick down into my hand in a way that created a tense band across the top of my hand. And I've said this before, when you're trying to play a fast, intricate passage With tension, it is like trying to accelerate a car with one foot on the brake. You've got two opposing forces working against each other, and eventually something will break. At best, you're just not going to play the piece very well, and at worst, you're going to injure yourself. So as I was practicing this, the way I found that had the most success for me was to really practice letting go of the relaxation in my hand and allowing the fingers the full range of movement to produce the strokes. Now, obviously, if you are attempting a piece like this, you will require a base level of technique already. This is not the sort of thing, without trying to be disparaging to anybody, this is not the sort of thing that new drummers should be attempting, because it will be overloading too many things at once. So the nature of drummer that is likely to actually attempt this is going to already have at least some firm degree of foundational technique, which, as far as I'm concerned, involves having a strong understanding of the fulcrum and the fingers within each stroke. Essentially, you're trying to practice these difficult passages with as little tension as possible. As I say, it's about trying to make sure those fingers are producing the full range of movement. So as I'm working through this 2-2-4-3-3 phrase here, I appreciate I can't communicate relaxed sensations through the camera, but hopefully you can see there is just a sense of bounce and ease and relaxation to my strokes. If you have tension, you are going to amplify that as you speed up. And it becomes robotic, and it becomes stiff, and it becomes untenable. Now, tension occurs as the body's response to a lack of control. So if you are starting to feel like you are not in control of these flam taps and these Swiss triplets, the body essentially tenses as a defense mechanism to try to power through. We need to try to overcome that reaction. We need to stay slow enough that we retain control and build it up generally so that tension reaction doesn't trigger. So there's nothing wrong whatsoever with practicing very, very slowly, because you're teaching yourself the movements, you're internalizing the rhythm while maintaining this sense of complete relaxed control. And as I say, for me, it was specifically a band across the top of my hand behind the knuckles that was becoming very tense as I was trying to power my way through these flam patterns. Once you can get to that stage consistently, it then just becomes a matter of time of building it up slowly. And I'm really trying to maintain that sense of relaxation there. This brings us then finally to the accompaniment. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about how I approached this. As with many things I do these days with my compositional work, I approach things from a functional perspective. So when I'm writing for a bass drum, when I'm writing for a conga or some wood blocks or even the snare drum, what's the role they are fulfilling? What role is the bass drum playing? What role is the conga playing? What role are the wood blocks playing? Now, as I hinted at the beginning of this video, the nature of these three sounds produce three contrasting tones. We have the deep sound of the bass drum, the middle dry sound of either a taiko or a conga drum, and then we have the high-pitched tones of something like a wood block. And because of the frequency differences, the tonal differences between these three instruments, they can fulfill different functions. So generally speaking, I use the low bass drum tones to anchor the beat, to anchor the main rhythm. I use the mid conga or taiko tones to emphasize and play along with the main phrasing. And I use the high toned wood blocks to really accentuate key parts or counter rhythms. Now, when we look at the use of these accompaniments within this piece, there are too many individual elements to go into great detail, but I'm going to look at one item in particular here, which is bars number 5 and 6, which are on screen now. We can see some interesting interplay between all four parts. We've got the snare drum on the top line, then the bass, the conga, and the wood blocks in order, working down the stave. Now, our snare drum line is in common time, so we're hearing a section that sounds like this. Carrying on into bar 7 there briefly. Against this, we have two contrasting clave figures, which are not immediately obvious. Let's look at the bass drum here, and let's count the groupings. So in that first grouping of notes, we've got an eighth note, an eighth note, and a dotted eighth note. However, that dotted eighth note is followed by a 16th note rest. So if we consider the number of 16th notes running behind that, an eighth note is 2 16th notes, a dotted eighth note is 3 16th notes, and then that rest there makes it 4. So we've got 2, 2, 4, 3, 3. Let's hear what that sounds like. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If I repeat that, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We get this adapted clave figure over the course of 7 notes to the bar, 7 beats to the bar. Let's look now at the wood block and see if we spot a similarity. We start with a 2-note rest, then an eighth note, then a dotted eighth note with the rest after it. So we have 2, 2, 4, 3, 2, 1, with that first 2 being a rest. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. That doesn't sound like much until we repeat it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1. So simultaneously throughout the bar, on the bass drum, we've got this adapted 3-2 clave happening, whereas down here on the wood blocks, we've got this adapted 2-3 happening. So they're kind of crossing each other in opposite directions throughout the course of this passage. The first note of the bass drum pattern lines up with the first beat of the bar. So this is grounding the passage, whereas all of those woodblock figures are off the beat. So that's contrasting, that's emphasizing, accentuating, and as I say, providing a counter rhythm to what the lower tones are doing. Now, throughout all of this, we have this passage on the conga in that third stave that is essentially following the notes of the snare drum, just not all of them. So it's providing this sort of mid-toned rhythmic interplay that is both referencing the snare drum but also playing its own rhythm as well. The bass drum on the lower pitch is anchoring the main beats, the main rhythm. The wood blocks are counteracting this, providing a sort of contrasting counter rhythm, accentuating certain points. And the conga in the middle has a little bit of free rein to switch between the two. It can sometimes accent certain parts, especially in the common time sections, following along with the accents in sync, or it can provide counter rhythms itself on a slightly more, I don't want to say interesting, a slightly more involved way than the wood block. Because of that high-toned nature of the wood block, that tone was often sitting high up in the mix, just playing a steady counter rhythm to what the more complex rhythms were doing underneath it. But I hope this has given you some insight into the nature of this piece and into my thought processes behind it. So I very much hope anybody listening to it enjoys listening to it, and I certainly hope that anybody performing it enjoys performing it, and I hope this video has been of interest. So thank you very much to Arts Council England for funding this. I'm very grateful, and this project wouldn't have happened without it. And thank you for watching and listening. Thank you very much.